Hello and welcome to a special edition of Shock News. My name's Benny Fiddimore and today I'm joined by Oliver Sykes and Noah Buckingham-Reed to discuss and dissect the local elections. As of now, Reform are leading the way and have won hundreds of seats across the country. The Tories and Labour have had a tough night. The Tories have lost 386 seats, whilst Labour have lost 118 at the time of this recording. Reform have won control of Staffordshire and Lincolnshire councils, taking both from the Conservatives. There's also been mayoral elections, with Labour winning in Doncaster, North Tyneside and in the west of England. Former Tory Dame Andrea Jenkins was victorious for Reform in Greater Lincolnshire. And there's also been a Westminster by-election. The seat of Runcorn and Helsby was up for grabs. It previously belonged to Labour MP Mike Amonsbury, who resigned after confessing to common assault earlier this year. He had a 15,000 majority, however Labour were today beaten by Reform's Sarah Pochin by just 6 votes. So, welcome. It's been quite the night in these local elections. Westminster, that's a seat that Labour have lost, had a 15,000 majority, lost it by 6 votes. Is this a significant thing, Ollie and Noah? Is this because it's just a by-election and people like to protest vote and maybe they've gone for Reform this time? Also lower turnout? Or does this really signify what the British public are thinking when it comes to a Westminster voting intention?
Well, it is big. It's a real test for Starmer, this one, really. 6 votes was separating Reform and Labour. And it's big for Reform. It's going to give Farage a lot of momentum. Not only getting a seat in Westminster today, but getting, well, at the time of recording, 462 councillors. Huge. So Keir Starmer saying, I get it, I think is interesting, because if you did get it, I get it, you would have maybe perhaps, gone back on some policies, changed some stuff, and, maybe he is finally, there's a switch in his head, and the public opinion's actually got to him. I don't know.
You don't want to overplay sort of the level of this election either. I think there is an element where we have to understand this is the first major test for a lot of these parties, a lot of these candidates. There's a new run of candidates, obviously, and it's the first major electoral test since the election, which went so successfully for Labour. And I think before knowing the scope of that, it's really hard to shift on policy or really find out where the political ground is and where they can make it up. Clearly, what they will learn from this is that they have lost some political ground over the last year, or just under a year, and now they need to look at where they can make that back up.
Do you think it's interesting? Because obviously they've been in government for 10 months. And sometimes governments may think they have a bit of a honeymoon period in that first 10 months. However, it would appear that based on these results, they've not done as badly as the Tories, mind you, but based on these results, it has been quite bruising for Labour. And is that why is that? Because this is the honeymoon period normally. Why is it different this time round?
Well, I think the honeymoon period is only for a handful of weeks, months after the election. I'd say that is definitely over now. And I don't think they handled the honeymoon period particularly well. It was around September time at conference, and outside there were many protesters over the winter fuel allowance. I was there, and the whole suit debacle was going on. At a time of conference, they were having to defend themselves a lot when it should have been a real celebration for them that, look, we're in power after nearly 14 years. And I think they thought they were going to get an easy ride, and they definitely have not had that.
I think, especially with Labour, when we elect a Labour government in this country, people expect Labour to be the party of kindness and won't do the harsher things that maybe we elect the Conservatives to do there now and again. So when Labour came in, and they immediately prepared the country for pain, and that wasn't going to be appealing for the electorate, which they'd only really just pulled over from the other side, and bringing in this new era of pain in their first actions wasn't going to cement this honeymoon period. It never was, and we're seeing that now in these local elections.
Yeah, and I mean, they didn't necessarily have to take the policy routes that they have, but they, I'm sure, will say, obviously we haven't got anyone here to defend themselves, but they will say that, well, after 14 years of, Tory, measures, we're put into this place because of the black hole in terms of public finances, that we have to make these difficult decisions, which, in one hand you can understand, because they can't just keep spending because, well, the national debt will just be irretrievable, kind of, if you know what I mean.
So this seat that we're specifically focusing on in Runcorn, it's gone from Labour to Reform. With Labour in the last 10 months, they've said that there's a £22 billion black hole, and of course that results in difficult decisions. The Tories also inherited a black hole in 2010 when they came into power, and their answer was cutting welfare and austerity. So far in the first 10 months of Labour, we've seen them inherit, again, a black hole from the previous government, and they've said in this budget they're going to slash welfare benefits. It all sounds a bit samey, doesn't it? And do you think that could be why people have thought, right, we're not going to vote for Tories or the Labour or Labour because they're a bit similar. They're coming out with the same old stuff time and time again, so it's time for something new. Do you think that might be why they've gone for a third-party option?
Maybe, and I always think we knew this was going to be sort of a key point in this, that people were going to vote as almost a protest vote where they can, and that's going to be outside of these major two parties. We did wonder if the two-party political system had died at the last election. I think maybe that's overstating, and we don't want to look here and be reactionary to what we're seeing today. Again, it's a small amount. This particular seat, the Runcorn seat, it has a 46% turnout, less than general election, and under that, only Reform, off that 46, only 38% of them actually voted Reform. These numbers aren't the sort of huge breakthroughs that we're seeing. In terms of, in that seat particularly, there has been a major breakthrough, but I think across the country, there's still a lot to be done, and I think there is still a lot of ground which Labour can pull back. And
you mentioned the protest vote. Do you think that's what people are treating these local elections as?
Maybe,
a protest vote. Ollie, you're nodding your head.
Maybe there's a third. Yeah, maybe there's
not.
a third
Not.
party
I'm
vote.
not nodding in agreement. That was a nod that wasn't up and down. It was
no,
left to right.
Shaking your head, I should say.
Yeah.
Apologies.
I think
maybe a tactical vote.
I mean, yeah. I mean, at the end of the day, I think Reform. It's that difficult thing. Would you vote for them for the idea that you don't want the Tories or Labour, or would you vote for them for something new, for something fresh? Again, a lot of people, we don't have a lot to go off with Reform, do we? Because
there's no record. Of
course.
Yeah. But that's giving.
So are we giving them a chance, people?
Well, that might
but
well be the case. However, it is also worth noting that Liberal Democrats have gained 79 seats and have so far, as of the time of this recording, won 198 councillors. So it's not just people going towards Reform; they're also going to the Liberal Democrats. These parties they wouldn't vote in Westminster because of the way our electoral system sort of works, and it's hard to get third-party candidates into the House of Commons, and you're thinking, well, there's more of a chance at a local level, so that's why these parties are gaining more support, potentially?
I think maybe outside of the Reform surgence, which we expected, the two big stories outside of that are the Liberal Democrats, who have found a political space in this council run of elections, and the Green Party. So I think there is maybe an element of a extra voting outside of the two political parties, and also the fact that we are outside of parliamentary, outside of Westminster elections. And these are the points where we can start pushing what we really want the government to do by electing these councillors. I think it's interesting. There's a long way to go, I think, but having these two parties outside of the main two come through alongside Reform is definitely interesting and definitely shows there is a political ground outside of the two. I mean, is it fully broken? I'm not sure, but I think there is clearly a space for it, and a space that's been created maybe even since last July.
So, yes, Ollie, go on.
Yeah, and I mean, in terms of, like, the Conservatives losing a lot of councillors, I mean, 408 they've lost so far. And we've had, at the moment of recording at 3:20, we've had the result of 9 out of 23 councils. The Tories cut a lot of funding for certain areas. So I know Salford, I think, was quite heavily affected by the Tory years in terms of the funding that they gave to local authorities.
Yeah.
So again, that is probably another reason why people aren't voting the way they have, because they're annoyed. They're annoyed at the way their local area has been treated by the Tories.
That's an interesting point, because I feel like Labour, one of the key points of this new Labour government since they came in, was also devolution, giving more power to the councils, creating more devolved bodies, more mayors, more elected mayors, and that's clearly maybe backfired here. I'm not sure that these places are feeling the effect of more power in their hands, or because they're taking the vote, moving the vote away from Labour.
I think that their decision to do that sort of devolution thing, because they think it will benefit them, and like you say, with Dame Andrea Jenkins, that's be giving her some.
And we're seeing
some
we might
power
be expecting Luke Campbell, the former Olympic boxer, to win the mayoral seat, one of the mayoral seats for Reform.
Oh,
and I
yes,
think these
I
are
saw
things
that.
which maybe the devolution isn't working as they intended. I do wonder what they think about that. Or
I
do about that.
just want to finish off on Labour because I want to move on to the Tories in a second. But do you think, just to answer this question, do you think that the Tories for 14 years, it's factual, we've seen cuts, we've seen austerity. Do you think that people voting Labour last year were thinking, this is a new leap. We're going to get something different. We're going to put the days of cuts in the past, and we're going to look forward to the future. We're going to have a bit more investment and a bit more growth. And they haven't quite got that just yet. Do you think that might be why people have sort of turned their backs? And feel free to disagree with that, absolutely. Ollie, go on.
We saw so much of Starmer throughout his campaign to become Prime Minister. 5 years he was basically campaigning to be Prime Minister, leader of the opposition. And how often did he talk about, his family, his values, his background, coming from, the sort of, my father was a toolmaker,
We all know that,
Yeah.
don't we? Definitely. And his mum was an NHS nurse. It was a constant thing, wasn't it, of his campaign style?
And that sort of compassion and empathy, I just don't know. With these recent changes, it doesn't seem like we were given so much, and yet as we've come out of the election results, what have the public, really thought? Gosh, you know what? That was great of Labour to do that. I don't think there's really much,
Well,
particularly.
I think, as we've heard even from his reactions, these results today, he said he wants to do more change. He wants to continue this change, and
Which
it
is a long
really pushing the
process.
point.
He
I think,
has
you
got a
can't
mandate
be
for
immediate.
several
Can't be
years,
immediate,
hopefully, to if he continues.
So I do feel there may be a reactionary part to this, no? Or is there a it's a reactionary to what the immediate changes? But I think maybe these immediate changes are meant to lead to the longer term change, the longer term growth. Whether that happens, it's difficult.
I think it might be a case of people feel a little let down because they think that
it's very early.
It's still very early. There's been tough decisions to make. I think if we look specifically, and then guys, please feel free to discuss this as well. The farmers, they're probably feeling let down following the inheritance tax changes. We've had small business owners with the increase in national insurance for managers. All of this sort of thing, again, there was that whole incident where they were struggling to define who a working person was. These are people who are probably the voters who switched between Labour or traditionally have switched between Labour and Tory in the past. These are probably the people who they need to aim at, to target, do you think? And that might be why they've seen losses.
These are trivial things, and
these
are being sort of hyperbolized by people like Farage and by Reform, and that is the reason they've done so well. Maybe because they feel like working people in this country are feeling heard by a new voice, and I do understand that. But I do think there is an element where there is sort of a misleading there, because these issues aren't addressable as easy as some people would like to tell you. But I think a wider concern maybe that Labour, I think, have always felt out of touch for people. I think it was the immediate reaction when they came in, as this is a party that don't feel like that connected to.
Well, that is kind of their
country.
whole thing, isn't it? That's their whole
Labour
slogan.
Party is the working people's party originally, and when you come out of touch with the people, which you are meant to be the party for, both on the left, I think, both in the trade unions of the left, and also on the right, or the people of the working class who have been pulled over to the right. On both sides, I feel like they feel disconnected at the moment, and that can definitely be responsible for this drop which they're seeing.
Yeah, Ollie, anything to add on this one?
No, not particularly.
No? Okay, well, we'll finish on Labour then for now, but first we'll just hear what Starmer's reaction was to the results.
We must deliver that change even more quickly. We must go even further. I believe for some time that's the case. I'm reinforced in these results that that's what we've got to do. Yes, we get it. We've got to deliver that change more quickly and go further than we've gone so far.
Right, moving on now, the Conservative Party. We've spoken a lot about Labour, but the Tories have also suffered smashing losses overnight. They were voted out decisively at the last general election. It doesn't appear that people have regained the faith. So, do you want to discuss a little bit about Kemi Badenoch? What has she done wrong? What has she done right? I mean, whatever. Discuss why are they still struggling so much? I mean, because these are crashing losses. These are hundreds of seats.
Well,
Go on, Noah.
Another leader who's definitely felt very disconnected from the electorate, and we've seen that right through the night here. And maybe we thought that they'd be displaced by the Labour Party, but they've also heavily been outvoted by Reform. And these are the people who I believe Kemi Badenoch has tried to appeal to since coming into that position, and try and bring back some of those voters from across the line, from the Reform line, the further right line maybe, and bring them back in by being hard on the net zero line, sort of reversing terms, and then also sort of changing the wording in Conservative policy on immigration. But that has to be a baseline distrust of the Conservative Party, both from obviously the left of them, including Labour and of course further left, but also now on the right, because I think when you look back at the start of net zero, anybody disbelievers in net zero, or believers who don't believe it's feasible, they look at Kemi Badenoch as somebody who is part of the government which started off that campaign. How are they going to trust somebody who or trust in their word that they believe that they're not on the net zero train when they were the person who were involved in starting it? Similar with migration, I think you look at migration numbers, people on that right don't trust in the Conservative Party to deal with immigration in the same way. Kemi Badenoch doesn't appeal to anybody at the moment, I don't think. There's not a base level for her appeal, and we're seeing it right through these elections. I mean, we've had in the last half an hour or so, they've lost control of Nottinghamshire, they've been outdone by Reform by 15 odd points, a huge 17-point drop. We've seen that they're even behind the Independents in Lancashire.
Yeah.
Huge Reform gains.
So yeah.
And that's a lot of these is where Conservatives are second and have had huge.
They've lost vote shares. Yeah,
of course.
Yeah,
and the last
yeah,
time, obviously,
yeah.
was in 2021, where the Conservatives had a positive run, and obviously this is going to look pretty dire, but it's measured change. But it's really a tough time for the Conservatives. This one.
So Ollie, what do you want to add?
Yeah, well, Kemi Badenoch talked to X earlier, a couple of hours ago, and she has said, "The renewal of our party has only just begun. I'm determined to win back the trust of the public and the seats we've lost in the years to come." And one of the comments, Simon Breeden says, "This sounds like I will continue to rebuild the party." Statement with a time of reflection over the weekend and resignation on Tuesday. I don't think we'd be seeing a resignation from Kemi Badenoch.
I think it's far too soon to be speculating about that sort of thing. She's only been in office since November, so perhaps she hasn't been able to get going with what she wants her vision of the Tory party to look like. However, this is still her first electoral test as leader. Ollie, where did it go wrong? What has she not done right?
Well, what have the Tories done right, really? I think they've had a lot that's gone wrong in recent years, and that hasn't fallen off the brain for a lot of people. People will, when they make huge errors, people won't forget that quickly. Now, for Labour, sort of smaller things maybe, because things like that, smaller things like the freebies and tickets and stuff like that probably won't stay on the mind. But when things like Partygate went on for so long and were constantly ingrained within the media for weeks, the media didn't let go of that. I'm not saying that media have let go of the Labour donor things, because we've had the likes of Rachel Reeves recently with Sabrina Carpenter tickets.
Absolutely.
But I just think that there was so much scandal that people have just not forgotten that.
So it's a case of what happened in government and it's still too soon. It's too fresh in the people's minds.
Yeah, I wouldn't really say that. There's been nothing that's There's been nothing that stood out to me from Badenoch.
Yeah. So
particularly,
essentially,
but she has said in this statement that she is only at the beginning of her renewal of the party.
Yeah.
So
So
there's time to come.
Essentially, she's got to win back the trust. But Noah, this could be quite a long process, and it's going to take a massive deep clean, essentially, of the Tory party to get it back to winning elections.
I still think there's an identity crisis, really. There's not really a clear basis, a clear united front on where they want to be. I mean, Robert Jenrick earlier today came out in support and ruled out a coalition or any sort of idea with Reform. but he's obviously he's sort of meddled in with reform and agreed with reform MPs before and voted alongside them. I think there's just a disconnect on where they want to be, where they should be, whether they should be heading back to the centre ground, whether they should be claiming a new centre, or whether they should be moving further to the right. It's just a jumble of ideas, and there's nobody. And of course, the new parliamentary party, and now a whole jumble of ideas too. And I'm sure a few of them will be looking at reform. A few of them will be looking back to the centre. It's a mess, and it's one that she'll have to clean up. But it's one that's not going to be recovered in this set of elections.
And just one last question on the Conservative Party. As of now, the pair of you, do you think that there is room for the Conservatives in the political market, shall we say? Have they got a purpose on the political spectrum right now?
I'd say they can. They can, because I just don't think the appetite for reform lasts. And I know that's going to seem maybe naive to look at reform after this sort of outstanding performance for them, and say that they won't last in this environment. But when you put people into positions of power, when you put the trust with these mayors, and we have a lot more council, we're going to have at least some councils run by reform completely majority now, and whether that sort of momentum lasts, and when you put them in governments, how much they deliver, they've very much still a protest party in the eyes of many, I think.
Ollie?
Yeah, I think the sort of populism of three-word slogans have been very much something.
And they're great for a protest party. As soon as you enter governance, it's quite difficult.
It's something that you can do that really just sticks in people's mind and have a clear objective. You know, it shows that you've got something clear that you want to secure, and it is kind of confusing. I mean, Labour, what do we know? Economic growth is something they want, but they've got so many ways that they're trying to, like, it's not very clear. And again, with the Conservatives, it's not very clear where they're standing on things, particularly.
And just, so final question on that. Is that because Labour and the Conservatives are seemingly coming very close together on the political spectrum? And do you think that's led to kind of like an identity crisis in both parties?
Well, it's interesting because as we go into an election in a while away, you know, is anyone going to get a clear majority? I know we're talking about the future, but, you know, it's interesting because we're always looking ahead, aren't we, to what's coming up. And,
there are many countries. I think we're quite unique in one of the countries that don't end up with huge multi-party coalitions.
Yeah.
So is it? I would argue.
But could we be seeing a coalition? You know, I don't know.
Well, I'm going to talk about reform because they have. You know, you can't ignore them. They've made many gains tonight, not only in councils, obviously in Westminster and in the mayoral elections. We're going to hear from their new MP, Sarah Pochin, now.
Enough is enough. Enough Tory failure, enough Labour lies. And I want to thank every one of you who were brave enough to put a cross against my name.
And we'll also hear from their leader, Nigel Farage.
In much of this country, if you vote Conservative, you will get Labour. We now are the opposition party in the United Kingdom to the Labour Party, and the Tories are toast. You're witnessing the end of a party that's been around since 1832. It's disappearing.
So, yes, Nigel Farage saying that the Tory party are on the verge of disappearing, that they are now the true opposition. I want to go back about 10 or 11 years when Nigel Farage was last in the spotlight as leader of UKIP, just before the referendum. In 2014, UKIP won hundreds of council seats, not on the same level as what we've seen Reform win today. They also won a majority of the UK seats for the European Parliament. Those were elections which weren't Westminster-based, and people voted for UKIP in their thousands at that point, in the same way that people have voted for Reform today. He goes on about being the true opposition. We've had the polls, now we've had an official poll to kind of show that there is that support. But really, will this translate into Westminster seats whenever that next election is? Is it going to be like UKIP?
Well, in the recent election, they got a lot of votes, but the votes didn't equal the seats. So I think there will be momentum for Reform, definitely. Yeah, I mean they've got momentum today. That's something that you want because it gives you confidence and it will inspire the members and the leadership to grow and keep doing what they do. I think, in terms of, you know, whether it will. I think Farage, I don't know whether he said this explicitly, but I think he kind of wants to be pushing for sort of leading the country.
Yeah. I think he has said that now, to be honest, that he wants to build a party that can win in 2029. So Noah, traditionally the UK, the voting population have either voted Tory, centre-right, or Labour centre-left. Would the country really be willing to vote for a party that's more on the extreme? Because, Labour under Jeremy Corbyn was on the extreme, but on the other side, more towards the left, and people completely rejected that. Would they really be willing to go for something a bit more extreme in reform at a Westminster election? Obviously, it's up for discussion, isn't it?
I can only reinstate that a protest party and a party of governance are very, very different, and very different in the way that they're structured, in the very way in the way that they operate, and very different in the way that they campaign. And we've seen that definitely here. Whether it can translate in when we get to 2029, I think it's still a party in its infancy, posing as a party which has the sort of the backing behind it, the machine, the party machine. There's not really a party machine yet for reform. They're trying to sort of recruit candidates. There's no real structure, main structure to it. I think there's a long way to go, and
they do have 4 years though. They do have 4 years to build. But at the same time, they have 4 years to have scandals. I mean, we've already had the Rupert Lowe scandal, which I thought might, kind of push a halt on their momentum, but it clearly hasn't. Yes, Ollie.
And we had a thing about the Stockport reform website the other day.
Yes. There's been a few allegations against certain candidates of allegations of racism, homophobia, etc. I have seen that, and they have had to remove some candidates, although I can't give official figures on that because I don't know them. However, yes, I have seen that in the news. We saw Trump win in 2016 and then again last year. I think none of us expected to wake up to a Trump victory all those years ago.
The West is moving to that. We've had it in Italy, I believe, haven't we? France is it Marine Le Pen?
Marine Le Pen, yeah. On the rise in France, yeah.
So it's interesting. It is interesting.
I don't want to underestimate the threat, but we're only less than a year away from electing a Labour government here. I wouldn't underestimate the fact that the Liberal Democrats have taken almost left of Labour and have done very well here.
Yes, true.
The Greens have made positive progress, despite there still being some flaws in the party there in terms of their growth. And I just think that there is an easy route to getting very downbeat on the idea that that reform are going to have this sort of huge resurgence. But I think there also is a space where there could also be a surgence on an insurgency from the left, which I think there's been a lack of urgency. But I don't underestimate European countries, and of course in this country, that there could be a surgency from more pro-European ideas. I just think there's a lot of time for it, a lot of time for reform. There's also a lot of time for the left, or the left of Labour, to reinstate the fact that there is an alternative, and it's not just reform as the alternative.
Well, it's very interesting. This could be the biggest change in the UK political landscape in modern history. At the time of the ending of this recording, Reform have won 493 councillors. Liberal Democrats are on 222, they're up 91. Conservatives on 193, down 462. Independents on 62, that's down 19. Labour on 54, that's down 128. And Greens on 50, that's up 27. So, more results are coming in. 1,600 seats to be declared this evening. So, thank you very much for listening to this Shock Radio News special on the local election results. Until next time, goodbye.